Welcome to the deep dive. So many of us hit a point where we feel, well, fundamentally stuck. You might know intellectually that your life needs a serious refresh, maybe even a complete overhaul, but actually starting that, figuring out how, that's often the wall people hit. Today, we're not just talking about tweaking a few habits. We're digging into source material that offers a blueprint for radical, fundamental life transformation. Our goal here is to pull out the real mechanisms, the practical, sometimes surprising steps that kickstart and, crucially, sustain that kind of deep personal change.
Exactly. And the analysts we looked at, they've laid out this, well, challenging but quite clear four-part roadmap. It's really designed to push you past just being aware there's a problem and into measurable, almost identity-level shifts. We're looking at a complete system, moving from that internal feeling of this isn't right to creating a new external reality that actually lasts.
Okay, let's jump right into phase one then. Recognizing the necessity. We all sort of know awareness is key, but these sources frame it a bit differently. It's not just this vague sense of dissatisfaction. It requires a really specific, almost cold-hard look at your current reality. The core question they pose is, are you actively designing your life, or are you just kind of passively watching it unfold?
Right. And what's interesting is how the research forces you to get granular. It demands you move past, I need to be happier, and really pinpoint the specific areas. Is it your career that feels stagnant? Is it a health issue you keep ignoring? Maybe a relationship dynamic that's holding you back? This detailed recognition, they argue, is the single most important step. It gives you the actual leverage point for change. If you don't see the specific problem, well, you can't fix it.
Okay, but couldn't that feel a bit harsh
Eh.
or overwhelming? I mean, what if you do recognize the problem clearly, but just seeing it makes you anxious, not motivated? Does the source material offer maybe a slightly gentler way into this first phase, or is it just tough love?
It does offer another angle, but it sort of flips the motivation. Instead of focusing only on the pain of now, the material pushes you to calculate the cost of inaction. Basically, they suggest really quantifying, maybe even mathematically, the energy, the time, the lost opportunities if you stay exactly where you are for, say, another 6 months or 5 years.
Okay.
That specific number, that metric, it provides the urgency you might need. If you realize staying put literally costs you, I don't know, $50,000 in missed earnings or years of poor health, well, the whole calculation changes in your head. The observation from the data is pretty blunt. If the perceived cost of staying the same feels lower than the perceived cost of changing, you just won't move. So quantifying it helps break that paralysis of just feeling vaguely unhappy.
I like that shift, moving from a fuzzy emotion to something you can actually calculate. Okay, so you've laid that foundation, you see the cost. But then, almost immediately, you run into that big psychological barrier. Which brings us nicely to phase two, overcoming internal barriers. The sources really hammer this home. The biggest obstacle often isn't external stuff, it's the story you're telling yourself inside. We're talking about those really deep, self-sabotaging thoughts, right? Not just worries, but those core beliefs like, I just don't have the discipline, or I'm too old, I missed my chance, maybe even are just fundamentally flawed. The research labels these as cognitive distortions, basically, just stories you've been telling yourself, often to protect yourself from the risk of trying and failing.
Yes, exactly. And if we're talking about true transformation, like the deep kind, the mandate isn't just to, chant positive affirmations. It's to fundamentally rewrite your identity script. You can't build a completely new life on top of an old negative story that keeps predicting failure. It just won't stick.
So how do you do that? Rewrite the script.
Well, the main technique highlighted is called cognitive restructuring. It's kind of a two-step process. First, you actively trace that limiting belief back. Like, when did you first decide you weren't smart enough or weren't capable? Try to find the origin. Second, you challenge the evidence for that belief. Really question it. Is it actually true? Where's the proof? Once you start to shake the foundations of that old belief, then you can effectively replace it with new affirmations. But they need to be rooted in actual evidence, even small past successes. Things like, I am capable, I can learn, I can grow.
Okay, wait though. If it's just about rewriting stories, why is it so hard? Why do people spend years sometimes struggling with self-doubt or even in therapy.
Hmm.
Doesn't the research acknowledge how difficult and time-consuming it really is to undo maybe decades of telling yourself that negative story?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely acknowledges that. The research suggests this phase two, requires probably the most sustained mental effort and consistency. But the key insight, the sort of nugget here, is that you shouldn't necessarily aim to eliminate the negative thought completely. That's often unrealistic, maybe even impossible. Instead, the goal is to reduce your belief in that thought, to lessen its power over you. They actually recommend something called the evidence journal method. The idea is every time that negative thought pops up, I can't do this, you immediately counter it, maybe write down 3 specific, verifiable pieces of evidence from your past that contradict it. Doing that process repeatedly, maybe hundreds of times, slowly weakens the neural pathway associated with that negative script.
Huh. That's a powerful distinction, not eliminating the thought, but reducing the belief in it.
Okay.
So, let's say you've calculated the cost of inaction. You've started the hard work of restructuring that mental blueprint. Now we hit the critical pivot. Phase 3, transitioning to action. Because even if the mindset starts to shift, what's the big reason people still don't move forward?
No.
The analyst's pinpointed analysis paralysis. That endless waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan. The research basically says that awareness and planning without immediate action is just procrastination dressed up nicely.
Right, which raises a really important point about what constitutes a first step. Most people, they look at the huge mountain they want to climb and they decide they need like a whole new set of expensive climbing gear before they even take one step. But this model is insistent. The rule is start today. Even a tiny step, start today. The urgency is built in to try and defeat that procrastination right where it starts.
Today, not tomorrow, not next Monday.
Today. And we're talking about the concept of the immediate micro commitment. This isn't some grand gesture. It's about making a list, maybe just 1, 2, or 3 things that take less than, say, 2 minutes to actually complete, and doing one right now. So if you want a career change, the micro commitment isn't spending hours updating your resume. It's maybe sending one email to a contact for an informational chat. Takes a minute. If you want better health, it's not starting some complex new diet today. It's maybe just drinking a full glass of water right now.
That
Done.
So the aim is really about reducing friction, getting any kind of forward motion started, rather than focusing on some big dramatic effort initially. It's about creating that first bit of kinetic energy.
Precisely. The mechanism they describe is clear. Success, even tiny success, reinforces action. And those small successes build momentum. If you wait until tomorrow, you give that internal barrier, that limiting belief we talked about, another, 12, 24 hours to rebuild its defenses and talk you out of it. The data they cite suggests that starting today, even if it's imperfectly, raises your long-term probability of success by something like over 40% compared to waiting for the start of next week or next month.
Wow, 40%, that's significant. But okay, that initial momentum, as we all know, can be really hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final stage, phase 4. Sustaining transformation. Let's be real here. Transformation, especially fundamental change, is a long, often grinding journey. Setbacks, doubts, they're pretty much inevitable, right? If you're making these big, non-partial life changes, you're almost guaranteed to have days, maybe even weeks, where you slide back into old patterns, where that cost of inaction number feels distant, and those limiting beliefs just roar back to life. How do the sources suggest you manage that? That inevitable emotional dip, the feeling of failure?
Yeah, this is crucial. The research suggests you need to completely redefine how you view failure. The people who ultimately succeed aren't the ones who never slip up. They're the ones who have a functional resilience loop. What that means is when a setback happens, and it will happen, they immediately shift into an analytical mode rather than just beating themselves up emotionally.
An analytical mode.
Yes, the key insight on resilience is shifting how you measure progress. Stop measuring it purely by behavior. Did I stick to the plan perfectly? And start measuring it by persistence. So maybe you missed the gym 4 days in a row. Okay. The important question isn't, did I fail? It's how quickly did I reset and get back to my micro commitments? Success becomes measured in the reset time. How fast you course correct, not in the slip-up itself.
That is a huge reframing
Wow.
because it turns setbacks from these like moral failings into just data points,
Hmm.
information to learn from. Okay, but what about long-term stability? Initial momentum fades, enthusiasm wanes. How do you build something permanent, something that lasts beyond the first few weeks or months?
Right, good question. Stability seems to come from two things: accountability and systemization. The material strongly advocates for building some kind of external structure, an accountability system that focuses on monitoring the inputs, the effort, not just the outcomes. This could be anything from a coach to a dedicated friend or partner you check in with, or even making some kind of public commitment. The research shows that the moment that external monitoring stops, consistency tends to drop off dramatically.
Okay, external structure.
And the other part,
The other crucial piece is celebrating effort, not just achievement.
hmm,
This is really key for the long haul. Did you make yourself apply for 20 jobs this week, even though you only got one callback? Celebrate the effort of applying. Celebrate the consistency. This apparently helps harness your brain's reward system, the
yeah.
dopamine hit, to associate the hard work itself with positive feedback. And that seems to be the only way to really hardwire persistence over years, not just for a little while. Okay, so let's pull this all together for you listening right now. We've walked through this roadmap for fundamental change based on the sources. First, you got to calculate that cost of inaction to really light the fire. Second, you need to dig into those limiting beliefs, maybe using something like the evidence journal to challenge them. Third, bypass the planning paralysis with those immediate micro commitments. Start today. And finally, fourth, sustain it all by focusing on your resilience loop, shortening that reset time, and celebrating consistent effort through some kind of system. The analysts have laid out a pretty clear, albeit challenging, path for a complete life overhaul. So the real question we want to leave you mulling over is, now that you have a clearer idea of the mechanisms of transformation, what excuse is really left for staying stuck?
Remember that core advice for getting started. Don't wait for the perfect conditions or some grand plan to materialize. Start small, think big, but most importantly, take that first tiny micro step right now. Build that initial kinetic energy. Ultimately, the biggest takeaway from all this research seems to be that true, lasting transformation is less about just changing your outward behaviors and more about fundamentally changing your identity. Once you start acting like the person who is healthy, or the person who is disciplined, or the person who does take action, the behaviors tend to follow more naturally. You really do have the power, the sources suggest, to create a life that genuinely excites you, inspires you, fulfills you. But it requires that deep conscious shift in who you fundamentally believe yourself to be.